The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is arguably one of Nintendo's most important games, the timeline of which impacting all the subsequent games in the Legend of Zelda series. First made available in 1998 on the Nintendo 64, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time can now be played on the GameCube, the 3DS, and the Switch. But what makes this game so great? Why even bother playing it? The game follows a young boy, Link, who is tasked with saving the Kingdom of Hyrule, and by extension the world, by traversing through time, traveling back and forth as either a 10-year-old or a 17-year-old. It is this mechanic that allowed the developers to employ the use of contrast to build a sense of nostalgia for the player as they revisit the past to change the future. The effect of contrast can be found in many facets of the game, but none more important than in the music, the map, and the dialogue. And it is this technique and building of nostalgia that keeps players coming back to the game over 20 years later, and why you should play. Music is a tool in the game the way a sword and shield are tools in the game for the protagonist. The title is Ocarina of Time, and ocarina being a medieval wind instrument that can be carved out of a potato. However, the music is not just an ornament, but a conduit for the developers to build memories and thus a stronger sense of nostalgia. Koji Kondo, the game's composer, made great use of contrast by writing simpler, easier to process music for the 10-year-old versus the music for the 17-year-old, which is typically more formal and complex. Take the two songs learned in the Sacred Grove, for example. The two sound similar, but Suria's song is much more upbeat. It literally causes one to break out and dance, while the minuet is similar to a waltz. It's more composed, and the rhythm doesn't really allow for one to bust a move. Likewise, the player will notice the music within each dungeon as a child as being more calming and ambient, whereas the music as a 17-year-old is more discordant and meant to put the player on edge. What the developers are doing here is giving the player reprieve from the darkness of future Hyrule by allowing them to return to younger days and partake in the musical simplicity of childhood. Yay! The map takes on a major transformation from the past going into the future. As the story goes, the main antagonist Ganondorf succeeds in his plot to overthrow the monarchy of Hyrule, and he releases an evil into the kingdom. Take a look at the castle market as a child versus how it looks after you awaken as an adult. There's a noticeable difference in what is happening in the market when you play as a child compared to when you play as the adult. People are dancing, they're talking, selling wares, generally standing in the walkway. The color and music alone are symbolic of life, the warmth and the breath of life. Whereas the market square as an adult is quite literally dead. It isn't until you revisit the past that you get a sense of security and comfort at the side of the busy square. Initially, it's kind of annoying having to maneuver through all the people, the camera angle purposely placed to make it difficult to guide the character through the maze of people. When the player revisits the past, the things that were once found annoying are cherished. Link, and by extension the players, are given the opportunity to bask in the glory of younger days and revisit the life that was in the past, something that nature could never allow in real life. As one of Link's allies states, the thing that does not change are memories of younger days, which leads me to my next point. The dialogue of Ocarina of Time plays a prominent role in not just guiding the character along in the story, but it is used to impart pieces of wisdom upon the player, each piece of wisdom not just having to do with time, but with reflection. Likewise, the language used to speak with the 10-year-old greatly contrasts to the language used to speak with the 17-year-old. Lessons are imparted on the 10-year-old that a 10-year-old in real life can fathom, the language being a bit simpler and easier to understand, whereas the language used for the 17-year-old is more abstract and in some ways poetic. The contrast of the language does two things. First, it expresses that the developers intended this game to be played by all ages, although I would suggest 10 years and up because of this nightmare fuel. But it is a game that can be enjoyed as a child nonetheless. Second, it is a tool to sort of trick the player into believing that the past is done and nothing can change that, which is obviously true in real life, but not in the game. Take this quote from Sheik, one of the protagonist's allies, for example. Sheik sets the player up to believe that what is done, and the only thing the protagonist can do now is move forward to defeat the evil that has infiltrated the kingdom, right? Wrong. Again, there's a bit of relief when it is discovered that you can, in fact, travel back in time to help stop the spread of evil. It makes the dialogue as a child seem almost silly when you travel back in time, as you're now traveling with the mind of a 17-year-old. However, that does not diminish the lessons imparted on the child, especially if you played this game for the first time as a child. From the plot all the way to the musical score, Ocarina of Time simply checks all the boxes for one of the most well-rounded games from Nintendo. The developer's use of contrast helps to build a highly memorable experience for players by allowing them to travel between the past and future and exposing the players to differences between the two times. Their emphasis of enjoying younger days is so important because it reminds the player to take a moment and recall such times. And to do that requires a level of self-examination. The developers left Easter eggs of self-care and minor tools for the player to simply take a moment, enjoy the present, reflect on the past, and learn from it so that we may prepare for the future. It expresses a level of respect for the player by placing responsibility of examining ourselves on ourselves. And it is for this reason that you should play this game.